The World Turned Upside Down. Delivered on Sabbath morning, May the 9th, 1858, at the Music Hall, Royal Surrey Gardens. These that have turned the world upside down are come hither also. Acts chapter 17, verse 6. This is just an old version of an oft-repeated story. When disturbances arise in a state, and rebellions and mutinies cause blood to be shed, it is still the custom to cry, "The Christians have done this." In the days of Jesus we know that it was laid to the charge of our blessed and divine Master that he was a stirrer of sedition, whereas he himself had refused to be a king, when his followers would have taken him by force to make him one, for he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Yet he was crucified under 2 false charges of sedition and blasphemy. The same thing occurred with the apostles. Wherever they went to preach the gospel, the Jews who opposed them sought to stir up the refuse of the city to put an end to their ministry. And then, when a great tumult had been made by the Jews themselves, who had taken unto them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, and gathered a company, and set all the city in an uproar, and assaulted the house of Jason, and sought to bring him out to the people, then the Jews laid the tumult and the uproar at the door of the apostles, saying, "These that have turned the world upside down are come hither also." This plan was followed all through the Roman Empire, until Christianity became the state religion. There was never a calamity befell Rome, never a war arose, never a famine or a plague, but the vulgar multitude cried, "The Christians to the lions! The Christians have done this!" Nero himself imputed the burning of Rome, of which he himself doubtless was the incendiary, to the Christians. The believers in Jesus were slandered as if they were the common sewer, into which all the filth of sin was to be poured, whereas they were like Solomon's great brazen sea, which was full of the purest water, wherein even priests themselves might wash their robes. And you will remark that to this day the world still lays its ills at the door of the Christians. Was it not the foolish cry a few months ago, and are there not some weak-minded individuals who still believe it, that the great massacre and mutiny in India was caused by the missionaries? Forsooth, the men who turned the world upside down had gone there also, and because men broke through all the restraints of nature and law, and committed deeds for which fiends might blush, this must be laid at the door of Christ's holy gospel, and the men of peace must bear on the shoulders the blame of war. Ah, we need not refute this. Calumny is too idle to need a refutation. Can it be true that he whose gospel is love should be the fomenter of disturbance? Can it be fair for a moment to lay mutiny and rebellion at the door of the gospel, the very motto of which is peace on earth, goodwill towards men? Did not our Master say, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's"? Did he not himself pay tribute, though he sent to the fish of the sea, to get the shekel? And have not his followers at all times been a peaceful generation, save only and except where the liberty of their conscience was touched? And then they were not the men to bow their knees to tyrants and kings, but with brave old Oliver they did bind their kings in chains, and their nobles in fetters of iron, as they will do again if their liberty ever should be infringed, so that they should not have the power to worship God as they ought. We believe that what these Jews said of the apostles was just a downright wilful lie. They knew better. The apostles were not the disturbers of states. It is true they preached that which would disturb the sinful constitution of a kingdom, and which would disturb the evil practices of false priests, but they never meant to set men in an uproar. They did come to set men at arms with sin. They did draw the sword against iniquity, but against men as men, against kings as kings, they had no battle. It is with iniquity and sin and wrong everywhere that they proclaimed an everlasting warfare. But still, brethren, there is many a true word spoken in jest, we say, and surely there is many a true word spoken in malice. They said the apostles turned the world upside down. They meant by that they were disturbers of the peace, but they said a great true thing, for Christ's gospel does turn the world upside down. It was the wrong way upwards before, and now that the gospel is preached, and when it shall prevail, it will just set the world right by turning it upside down. And now I shall try to show how, in the world at large, Christ's gospel turns the world upside down, and then I shall endeavour, as well as God shall help me, to show how the little world that is within every man is turned upside down when he becomes a believer in the gospel of Christ. First, then, the gospel of Christ turns the world upside down with regard to the position of different classes of men. In the esteem of men, the kingdom of heaven is something like this. High there on the summit there sits the most grand rabbi, the right venerable, estimable, and excellent doctor of divinity, the great philosopher, the highly learned, the deeply instructed, the immensely intellectual man. He sits on the apex. He is the highest because he is the wisest. And just below him there is a class of men who are deeply studied, not quite so skilled as the former, but still exceeding wise, who look down on those who stand at the basement of the pyramid, and who say to them, "Ah, they are the ignoble multitude, they know nothing at all." A little lower down we come to the sober, respectable, thinking men, not those who set up for teachers, but those who seldom will be taught, because they already, in their own opinion, know all that is to be learned. Then, after them, there come a still larger number of very estimable folks who are exceeding wise in worldly wisdom, although not quite so exalted as the philosopher and the rabbi. Lower still come those who have just a respectable amount of wisdom and knowledge, and then at the very basement there come the fool, and the little child, and the babe. When we look at these, we say, "This is the wisdom of this world. Behold how great a difference there is between the babe at the bottom and the learned doctor on the summit. How wide the distinction between the ignorant simpleton who forms the hard, rocky, stubborn basement, and the wise man of polished marble who there stands resplendent at the apex of the pyramid." Now, just see how Christ turns the world upside down. There it stands. He just reverses it. Except he be converted and become as little children, he can in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. Not many great men after the flesh, not many mighty men are chosen, but God hath chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, heirs of the kingdom. It is just turning the whole social fabric upside down, and the wise man finds now that he has to go upstairs towards his simplicity. He has been all his life trying, as far as he could, to get away from the simplicity of the credulous child. He has been thinking and judging and weighing and bringing his logic to cut up every truth he heard, and now he has to begin and go up again. He has to become a little child and turn back to his former simplicity. This is the world turned upside down with a vengeance, and therefore the wise seldom love it. If you wish to see the world turned upside down to perfection, just turn to the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Here you have a whole summary of the world reversed. Jesus Christ turned the world upside down, the first sermon he preached. Look at the 3rd verse. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, we like a man who has an ambitious spirit, a man who, as we say, knows how to push his way in the world, who looks up, is not contented with the position that he occupies, but is always for climbing higher and higher. And we have a very fair opinion, too, of a man who has a very fair opinion of himself, a man who is not going to bow and cringe. He will have his rights, that he will not give way to anybody. He believes himself to be somewhat, and he will stand on his own belief, and will prove it to the world yet. He is not one of your poor, mean-spirited fellows who are content with poverty and sit still. He will not be contented. Now, such a man as this the world admires. But Christ just turns that upside down and says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The men who have no strength of their own, but look for all to Christ, the men who have no spirit to run with a wicked world, but who would rather suffer an injury than resent one, the men who are lowly and of a humble carriage, who seek not to lift their heads above their fellows, who, if they be great, have greatness thrust upon them, but never seek it, who are content among the cool sequestered vale of life to keep the even tenor of their way, who seem to have always ringing in their ears, "Seekest thou great things for thyself? Seek them not." The poor in spirit, happy in their poverty, who are content with the Lord's providence, and think themselves far more rich than they deserve to be. Now these men, Christ says, are blessed. The world says they are soft, they are fools, but Christ puts those on the top whom the world puts at the bottom. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.